the program manager from the Boston Arts and Residency. Worked with Boston Air in various capacities for 3 years now, and it's always been a pleasure to see the amazing projects that come out of the program. I'm excited to share this virtual space with y'all and to learn and talk more about decolonizing disaster management. You'll see me in the chat, and I'll be in some of your breakout groups as well. So,
thank you. We'd love if each of you can also introduce yourselves in the chat. So if you can put in there your name, your pronouns, where you're from, and whether you're an artist, a public servant, a community advocate, or some combination. And we'd also ask that if you can, to have a piece of paper and a pen handy for a little bit later.
Before we start off, I want to do a land acknowledgement. I currently reside on the traditional homelands of the Massachusetts people in the Boston metro region. It's also the traditional territory of the Nipmuc and Wampanoag peoples. And if you are joining us from the United States of America today, I want to acknowledge that the US is a product of settler colonization, genocide, and land theft, and all of the land in this country is indigenous land. If you don't already know whose traditional territory you are on, I encourage you to find out, learn that history, and learn about the tribes of your area and the treaties of that place. Thank you.
Thank you. So in this session, our goals are for you to walk away with some actions you can take to decolonize disaster management where you are. And however you define your community, we'll be trying to help you to think that through. So you may identify as an artist or a public servant or municipal worker, or if not, you may play another role in your community, and we'll be asking you to think about how to work collaboratively with artists or public servants and city departments where you are, or municipal departments, however that may be. For many years in the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture in Boston, we've been working to improve our processes and work toward equity within our public arts system and our department generally. I've been working with Erin for about a year through the Boston Artist Residency program. And during this time, we've been approaching our equity work really specifically by looking at how we can decolonize our processes and practices at the City of Boston. So in this way, I just want to share that we are in this process as well. We're really active in doing the work that we're going to try to guide you through today ourselves as well. So Sharon and I are really working at looking at how we operate, you know, within the, for me, with the public art program and artist residency program, and for Sharon in managing the artist residency program. And we're continuing to do this work. In particular, in my work with Erin, we've been able to work together to look at public art through a decolonizing approach. And we've been stepping back and also examining the definitions and the frameworks we inherited in this work, sort of big picture, and then really specifically, while thinking critically about the cultural roots that shape the system within which we operate.
So for our first activity today, we want to think about this term decolonization. You're probably seeing it in many places, and we're going to have a little bit of an opportunity now to talk it over amongst each other. Decolonization is kind of a buzzword right now that's currently on vogue in current discourses surrounding social justice, but what does it actually mean? Before we look at defining it, let's take a moment to understand what colonization itself means and how its legacy continues to impact us. So, American culture, as we know, emerged from the imperial philosophies of Western European colonialism and goes all the way back to the Roman Empire. You know, this is a settler state, settler colonial state, and it gained its economic wealth and political power through genocide, land theft, slavery, wars. So, you know, in the formation of America, the concept of manifest destiny drove the taking of the land, and that that concept upheld this hierarchy of certain individuals, certain people who have benefited from that process and continue to benefit from that process through this day. So, for Indigenous people, for Black people, people of color, and those people that the systems continue to marginalize both within and outside of the borders of this country, we have this legacy of ongoing trauma. And that leads to multiple emergencies, which we'll talk more about that in the second half of this workshop. So, you know, I guess I just want to say that those colonial philosophies and ideologies, they haven't gone away. They continue to influence our current economic, political, and cultural systems. And there's a cultural supremacy around that too, that makes it really hard for us to, as a society, to really think about that critically. So I can think of climate change as one example of these colonial philosophies that continue to have an influence on our present and future. And so, you know, I guess I've been concerned with how can we address this harmful legacy and this colonial trajectory that we're on. What can we do about it? Well, we can start with this process of decolonization. So what does it mean? I've spent some time thinking about this over the years, thinking about it through my artistic and scholarly practice. And we have a slide that we'd like to share with you that has some more information about it. So yeah, so here's basically what I have come to understand decolonization, what that means. And so basically what it is it's a concept and practice that Indigenous people and colonized people around the world are using to break free from these cycles of violence, discrimination, and despair that have come about through colonization over hundreds of years. And so how is this done? In tribal governance, tribes are relying on traditional methods, values, and also, you know, being creative and coming together to figure out how to evolve and meet the needs of the time. Decolonization also means relying less on structures imposed by the dominant system, and also building up tribal sovereignty and tribal self-determination. And so you can kind of read through here. It is an effective path to restoring cultural rights. And some of the way that you can begin this process of decolonization is to tell the truth about history and acknowledge the damage done by assimilation, by colonization, and all of the things that go along with that. That is how we can begin these processes to get towards true justice and true self-determination. And decolonization also means returning the stewardship of the land to the tribes, to the tribal people and the original ancestral landholders. It's a large concept that can be fit into this one word. And I think, you know, for this next activity, you can use this definition, which will keep the slide up here, and you can refer back to this for your for this activity.
Yeah, so going into this brief activity, our goal is really to introduce the concept of decolonization into the session as something relevant to you in your community, and to prepare for a breakout and to ground Erin's framework. So we're really trying to take this word from beyond a buzzword to something that's really real, that we can really look at and examine ourselves personally. So we'd like to ask you what decolonization means to you based on the definition Erin has shared with us and that you'll see on your screen. How does it manifest in your community? And so we're gonna ask you to take 3 to 5 minutes to write a few words or a sentence on a piece of paper and hold it up to your camera. And we can scroll through the participant screens to read these. And at the end, we'll choose a couple to read and discuss. So you should have some directions that have been sent to you there. And so we're asking you to write down a sentence of what decolonization means or looks like in your community, or a question that you might have about what it means. And it can be something that has already happened or something you'd like to see happen. And then hold your piece of paper up to the camera. And then to see all the images, you can click into gallery view in Zoom. So I think we'll give you a few minutes now.
Hi, everyone. If you've started to write down your definitions, feel free to hold up your papers to the screen. I have mine here as well. And then our facilitators, Karin and Erin, can take a look, and we'll pick some folks from the group.
Erin, do you want to pick one to start? Hey, Bayla, I think yours is upside down. Sorry if I mispronounced you. Thank you.
Yeah, I will. Let me see here. I'm just kind of going through and reading. If you could hold it up, maybe like right up close to the camera. Ah, wow, these are amazing. I wish we had more time to really go through this and talk about all of these. Let's see, I'm gonna ask, sorry, I muted myself. Dan Borrelli, would you read yours to the group?
It's nice to meet you, Erin. We've been on an email chain that we were supposed to meet, but we haven't met yet.
Oh, hi, nice to meet you this way.
I wrote, as an Italian American, decolonization means the removal of Columbus and the transfer of those lands, parcels, and parks back to indigenous tribes and stewardship.
Thank you. And let's see, maybe I'll choose one more person. Can you hold them up again? Ashley Pourier.
Hello? Okay. I wrote down land acknowledgement simply because it's such a big topic on my reservation, the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation, because there's a lot of strife of who owns what does the tribe own, what are unceded territories. So there's a lot of ownership, as well as what we have the right and the sovereign, the right to grow within our borders, because we are not acknowledged as a sovereign nation. I guess that's why I wrote that.
Thank you.
I'd also like to share that Franco, whose screen isn't working, sent this. Decolonization mindset for me is looking at alternative community-based public safety efforts to lessen police resources at events that we produce. Thank you. So I think we have time maybe for one more, Erin. Do you guys want to hold yours up again?
Bayla, Joy, I actually, could you read it? Because I'm having trouble actually reading the full thing, and I'm interested in what you have said.
Yeah, the outside the box.
Hi, everyone. I wrote decolonization means the extinction. Can you hear me? Okay, sorry. The extinction of the phrase, let's think outside the box, whereby everyone is now equally inside the box and no one has to defend their value.
Thank you, great. I feel like this, thinking about this term and really applying it to, you know, how it affects our communities is sort of the next step of using this phrase, you know, seeing it everywhere and wondering, what does that mean?
Yeah.
So yeah, I would love to continue these conversations. Thank you.
And Layla, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing that, just added into the text that she'd love if folks can add to the chat so that everyone can read them, and added there to the chat that first land back, peaceful stewardship of the land that cherishes respect of the land and people who thrive off its abundance. So thank you for that. So I think that would be really great if people are willing to share them into the chat. That'd be really helpful. Okay. So we're trying to stay on time. So I think we're going to move on to the next phase of the conversation. But thank you, everyone. For those of you working in cities, if you're thinking of doing an artist residency, we've been working with Animating Democracy in a Blade of Grass, and I think Purana Reddy is here, who's been a wonderful partner to us for some time on this, and we'll be sharing the Gauging Readiness document that they created as a resource as well. The artist residency program in Boston has taken a lot of forms. I've been designing and leading that for 5 years. Sharon is here, who's been 2.5 years, I think, 3 years working on the program. You're getting a sense of Erin's work and in particular about decolonization, but we want to offer you some context for the program itself, especially for those of you who might be interested in creating programs like this in your communities. In which artists and city workers, municipal workers come together as partners in a cohort. And it's this cohort model that really is sort of like these little mini areas of community where people are able to make connections and really support each other and critique each other and have great dialogue. And also break out of silos that we often operate in our city, at least. We have a brief video to share with you that we made special for this ArtPlace today. So we'd love to share that right now.
Sorry guys, give me 1 second.
Yeah, no problem, thank you.
Too many windows open. Here we go.
Oh, Marissa, we actually shared the, perfect, yes, the 101 video.
Great, here we go.
Boston Artists in Residence. Artists and civic workers explore, critique, and reimagine a better Boston. In this year-long collaboration, a cohort of artists bring their artistic expertise to the city, study programs and policies, and develop projects that test new approaches to city policies and processes. Under the guidance of the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, artists are strategically placed with city partners that share a deep investment in social justice and with whom they co-design their projects. In addition to individual artist residencies, this cohort of artists and municipal civic workers meets monthly to explore the intersectionality of their work and support one another. Since the program's inception in 2015, the common themes explored have included resilience and racial equity, understanding how local government impacts Bostonians, and democratic creation of city policies, processes, and procedures. Every year, projects are responsive to that year's social and political context.
The 2019 to 2020 cohort. 5 artists and 5 city departments have teamed up to co-design and create projects. In the wake of COVID-19, the program and the artists and city partners pivoted, making all engagements virtual and developing residencies that also respond to the current public health pandemic, while applying a lens of resilience and racial equity. This year, virtual programming has been embraced to produce dialogue around social justice topics like better understanding the cultural roots and impact of public monuments and colonial myths, and a poetry series that provides safe space for trans and non-binary artists to share their creative work. The pandemic has further revealed the disparities in fair housing as concerns about losing housing grow during this time. Projects that were already exploring fair housing access disparities and the nationwide budgeting process have pivoted to provide resources in an accessible and safe way to address those concerns.
With the uncertainty, disproportionate impact, and interconnectedness presented by the current public health crisis, community and civic advocacy are needed to bring forward the needs of the city's most underserved. To help imagine municipal policies and practices that help Boston become more resilient, the Artist in Residence program brings together municipal civic workers and local artists to collaboratively explore alternative solutions to city problems through creative problem solving.
We at the Housing Innovation Lab are currently exploring the ways in which the triple-decker has tied the fabric of the city together as a housing typology that's allowed many to call Boston home. In this exploration, we've understood that art and storytelling is a key component to engaging with residents, external partners, as well as other city departments. To partner with Boston Artist in Residency program is to work alongside dedicated artists that are willing to engage with the work we explore and provide a unique perspective on how we shape our work and communicate it to a wide variety of audiences.
To date, Boston Air has supported the projects of 25 artists and their city partner collaborators. With artists and city partners doing the work to challenge and reinvent the city systems and policies together, we can reimagine a better Boston.
Thank you. Yeah, it's really exciting to be a part of such a dynamic group, rethinking so many social justice issues through the lens of creative practice. In my work so far this year, I have organized an event called a virtual panel series called Confronting Colonial Myths in Boston's Public Space. And it was a 3-part series in which Indigenous leaders and artists, as well as allies, spoke about their work in the public realm. And they addressed how symbols perpetuating colonial myths affect the lives of Indigenous people in the city. And the mayor has recently this year, in light of the COVID-19 pandemic, declared that racism is a public health emergency. And so with this sort of framework of, really looking at racism as a public health emergency, we decided to look at the colonial myths that are perpetuated all throughout Boston's public space, whether that's in monuments or other infrastructure. And we have a little video clip about that right here.
Living in these colonial cities, in my experience, I am choking, suffering, on visual representation that demands that I don't exist.
How do you see monuments and memorials in the public sphere contributing to the public health emergency of racism and affecting the day-to-day lives of Indigenous people in your communities? What work are you doing to combat this or to draw attention to this?
Things are so covered up here, and it has an impact in when we go out and we're trying to talk to non-Native people about things and trying to link our struggles together. And the reason is because so many people in this state actually think that we're extinct.
All the way down the walkway was nothing but monuments honoring these colonizers, and they're towering over you. Seeing the letters being kind of carved into the stone, it's like by having to endure that and then also to be erased simultaneously.
When we're looking at public spaces, what is the reverence that is evoked from that? When we are walking the pathways of our ancestors, where are those spots that evoke, my goodness, I need to leave an offering here?
And for us, what it is very important, it is to uncover what it is the history and the networks that actually make possible those monuments and those names to happen, that actually make possible to perpetuate the normalization of white supremacy.
Perhaps space needs to be made in our society to think of Indigenous art as well as having that same sort of weight and importance, both ideologically and materially.
When we're talking about monuments, change, representation, where are the Indigenous people? Many of us are tending to historical trauma. Many of us are just trying to survive.
The monument about Christopher Columbus is not about the past. When we put up a monument, it's about the present. So to be really clear, when we're thinking about what monuments we're putting up, is what are we saying about ourselves? What are we presenting about ourselves? What do we want the world to see about ourselves?
Thank you. So what comes next with this artist residency? From my perspective as a Dakota and Odawa person, as an artist, as a cultural worker, and a community organizer, I see that the United States it's in a state of cultural emergency. However, I feel like our society does not recognize that widely. Or doesn't have a concerted way to deal with it at the level of culture. My experiences of being simultaneously inside of and outside of American culture and hailing from people who have been targeted for destruction by the dominant culture has given me a perspective to see those deep harms that American institutions and systems cause. And I don't believe that those harms should be accepted as inevitable or even acceptable at all. And I think that, you know, especially in this year, as we have seen everything happening, we have to examine how our cultural practices in America produces these kind of emergencies, and these crises. We're facing so many existential crises right now that are all interlinked. You know, of course, we know a pandemic, rising disparities, and civil unrest, and climate change. All of these things implicate the foundation, the cultural foundations of our society. And I feel like there's a convergence of political and economic failures in dealing with these crises. And it's so huge, we have to look deeper. What are the underlying causes? You know, some of these emergencies, like the impacts from climate change, forest fires, coastal flooding, social issues of homelessness and poverty, food deserts, police violence, lack of healthcare. These things come from systemic cultural practices that continue, they make us more susceptible to hazards, more susceptible to emergencies, and they limit our collective ability to be resilient. My residency, through my residency, I've been working with the Office of Emergency Management. And I've been looking at models of emergency management and planning, and disaster planning in particular. And I really feel like that these can be used as a framework for examining, questioning, rethinking, dismantling, transforming these defective cultural foundations that support our institutions and our systems. And if we were to declare a state of cultural emergency, we can envision how to use some of these techniques that pull together so many resources and people. They marshal all of this support to address large-scale issues. I feel like we really need some kind of something at that level, at that scale, to deal with these issues. And so, you know, these protocols are widely available through state and regional and city and tribal government offices. And so part of my residency is going to be going through some of those things and figuring out how to creatively translate those into this sort of cultural emergency framework. And I think we have to start by identifying, you know, those harmful byproducts of American society that have disastrous results and figuring out what is needed to attend to them. Then we can use this emergency management and disaster planning model to create a roadmap for combating them.
So these ideas are so big, Erin, and you know, I think it's really great that like in your residency, you're talking about applying these protocols that are readily available. But can you help us understand a little bit more what these byproducts of American culture that you're talking about are? We understand conceptually, I think, that they are, you know, circumstances that result from regular economic, political, and social activities, but can you help us to see them in our own lives with some specific examples?
Yeah, definitely. I think they range in scale, but you know, these harmful byproducts are those things that are normalized or accepted, you know, in the course of just regular doing the business of America. And they have the potential to create both short-term and long-term crises. And some of those ones that, you know, I've already mentioned throughout our time here together a little bit today, climate change, when, you know, looking at the forest fires and the increased level of storms and hurricanes that we're facing, institutional racism and white supremacy, the environmental catastrophes that come from resource extraction, and looking at the world as a resource to be consumed. You know, and we're looking at mass extinctions at a level that we've never seen before. You know, heading into this week of elections, we have this extreme political polarization. How do we resolve these things? You know, we've got global war and militarism, the nuclear weapons, and not to mention historical things like genocide and slavery, and actually the continuing slavery of human trafficking and even incarceration. I mean, these are just a few things. This is not a comprehensive list at all, but all of these things are byproducts of American culture. And I think it's time that we, you know, stop accepting those things and really look at what it is that we're creating.
And so in looking at these things and the exercise that we're going to have, you know, folks do with us in a little bit, we're going to be talking about these sort of cultural roots and foundations. You know, in working with you, we've been talking a lot about how we must begin by looking at the ways of thinking and acting within our culture that creates these emergencies. So again, taking another step back, can you talk to us a little bit about the harmful philosophies that are driving these systems, right? The institutions and the individual behaviors of people in our society, in American society and our culture. Like, what are some examples that are deeply embedded within our cultural ideologies that may be, you know, something we're so deep in that we might not be able to identify?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's difficult to be objective about those things, just because our culture is like the air we breathe. You know, we accept it for what it is, and we continue to perpetuate it. And yet, you know, I think that there's so much work being done across many sectors that people are, leaders and artists and scholars are identifying, you know, and tribal people are identifying these ways that cause harm. And some of those ones that immediately spring to mind, you know, again, not a complete list at all, but, you know, just thinking of, like, in particular, this toxic individuality of American kind of exceptionalism, and thinking of ourselves as separate from the natural world and each other. We have sort of a hierarchy in a way that we think of the world. Some people are better than others. People are better than animals. People are better than the natural systems that support us. We see ourselves as greater than those things. And because of those ways of thinking, you know, we have misogyny, we have toxic masculinity, you know, thinking in the short term rather than looking at future generations. You know, we have an economy and society based on consumerism and greed. We use violence as a tool for coercion, and we use the fear of dispossession as a tool to motivate people. You know, and a big one for me is also this Western cultural supremacy. You know, thinking of ourselves, of the Western ways of thinking in the world, Western philosophy, Western art practice, as greater than. And, you know, there's so many different ways. And I think part of this process of identifying a cultural emergency is really like, how does that impact us? We need to begin to think about that. We need to begin to think of these things, how these things manifest. You know, like, wastefulness, extreme wastefulness, and the squandering of resources. I mean, I could probably just really continue to go on and on about that, but there's so many different ways.
Thanks. Yeah, and some of the things you mentioned, some people in their comments, and you know, when we were going over the examples in the community, I was just thinking, I think Sam shared the question about how we define or evaluate arts, and so we're all having these questions, you know, across our communities, you know, but for each of us, it's really personal. And with such broad and overwhelming cultural disasters, even if we can identify them, you know, if we, you know, start taking this big view and like sort of coming down and down and trying to find ways to use sort of the practical tools at hand, you know, how do we find our place in them and begin to personally address them at a cultural level?
I think that we have to start by thinking of it at a personal level and seeing our own role in the culture, in the wider culture. You know, because culture permeates all aspects of our world, but it really does begin with personal decisions. It begins with how, you know, you interact with your family, how your community interacts with each other. And then from there, it expands to national, you know, all the way up to national, international institutions. So I absolutely believe that we need to be critical of our institutions and our leaders. But, you know, it's as important as, it's just as important that we also look at our own, you know, thinking. How are we perpetuating these things in our daily lives? How can we begin to change those things at a personal level? And how can we, you know, influence our family and communities to also begin to think critically about these things that we often take for granted?
Thank you to Karin and Erin for leading us in that great conversation. And a lot of what you're saying, what folks are saying in the chat, can be really helpful in this next section. And we're gonna go into breakout groups for this. And we're gonna have some conversations that are gonna help us frame this conversation of concepts around cultural emergency response. And so everybody will be broken up and randomly selected into breakout groups. And I'm gonna share this directions in the chat as well, but please do copy it over. So once you're in the breakout group, you might not see the chat here. But in your breakout group, use the chat to identify yourself as from a rural, urban, or tribal community, and identify the tribal community where you live. If you don't know, it's always helpful to do some Google and to understand the context of where you're coming from. And someone in the group should volunteer to identify an emergency in your community, whether it be homelessness, poverty, police violence, and then spend some time together trying to locate the cultural roots of that problem. And as a group, discuss how that emergency shows up in your work or in personal realm, and looking beyond the direct and immediate causes. And as said, I can see some of these conversations already naturally happening in the chat, which is really exciting. And so I'm gonna put the directions here so everybody has them once more. And so just discuss how the emergency as well might be addressed at a cultural level and what will be needed to change and how that might happen. And if there's time, try to choose someone who's identified with a different background to hear their views as well. And also please try to choose someone who will be interested in reporting back to us as a large group. And so here are the directions once more in the chat, and feel free to copy that over. And we're gonna have, Marissa is gonna randomly put folks into breakout groups, and we'll see everybody in there and then back in this main group later.
All right, everybody ready?
Hey everyone, I think we're all easing back on in. So we're a little bit tight on time, but we wanted to give as much time as possible for this conversation. So Erin, do you want to talk about how we can share back? Oh, I think you're muted.
It looks like we have just about 4 minutes left in our time together. And so I think we don't really have enough time, unfortunately, to have a report back from everybody. But if there's, you know, maybe one or two groups who really would like to share what came out of their process, please raise your hand and I'll call on you. And otherwise, please put the report back in the chat, and then we can, I think we can save the chat too at the end of this process.
Yeah, and as you guys are doing that, I just want to get some thank yous in as we're running out of time. So firstly, I want to thank Marissa for doing tech for us today, and Thomas and everyone else from ArtPlace Summit for having us. And we'd also love to thank Prana Reddy, who's been here and has been a great partner for us, and Pam Corza, Prana from A Blade of Grass, and Pam from Animating Democracy for their ongoing partnership. And also we want to thank Karin Owens, who joined us from the City of Boston from the Office of Emergency Management, and also our colleague Christina Carroll from the Mayor's Office of Arts and Culture, and you know everyone else who, members of the AIR cohort who created a space for conversation and action around these issues.
No, I just want to thank you, and I just want to let everybody know it's been a pleasure to work with Erin. Really excited about this project and what's to come from it. We had a really interesting group conversation in our breakout room, so you're definitely pushing the wheels of thought as it pertains to emergencies and thinking about it from a different lens, and so great job today.
Thank you. Karin, would you like to report back on what you had talked about in the group?
Yeah, sure. So I think a lot of us came from like an urban setting, and then we talked about COVID-19 and the impact that that's had. And so some of the things that we've talked about were, you know, just how, you know, disproportionately different races were affected, particularly Black and brown people were, you know, experiencing it at a higher volume. They didn't have the information, things like that. We talked about it from just a basic practice of, you know, the systems that are set up in America, how they're really built around in-person interaction. And so when COVID hit, you know, things that used to be normal, you know, you couldn't do them anymore. So for example, before, you know, if you saw somebody walking around with a mask on, you might think they're crazy, right? You're gonna look twice, you're gonna kind of watch them with one eye. But now, if you see somebody without a mask on, you're gonna kind of have that same kind of look like, hold on now, what's going on? Why you don't got your mask on? So I think that's, you know, a smaller scale of just a cultural example, but just one example that we kind of threw out there. And then I think we kind of ended off on like the third question. So we didn't get to finish just due to time, but that's what we had to contribute.
Thank you, Karin. Well, it is 4:15, and I would love to continue this conversation at a later time, and just wanted to say thank you to everybody today for joining us, and to Karin, my fellow presenter, and Sharon, and Marissa, and everybody at the ArtPlace team. Thank you so much. It's really been an honor to be here with you today.
It has, and I also want to name Veronica Wells for her good work with us creating those 2 videos that you saw today. And we do want to share resources with you as well. I don't know if we can put the gauging readiness, the where to place municipal partners, the gauging readiness document in there, just to share again with you. And also just offer ourselves up if anyone wants to reach out to us. I'll add my email into the chat if anybody wants to reach out to us if you're looking to do a project like this and want to continue the conversation. And we also have sort of a general email address that I think Sharon and I both get. So, oh, thanks, Prana, for sharing that. All right. Thank you all. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, everyone.
Good one.
Thanks.
Bye.
Some casual outro music.
All right. Yay. All right.
I'm really enjoying this.